The scene unfolds as the movie begins, with a pizza boy knocking on the door to deliver an order. Scott, the recipient, opens the door and gazes at the pizza boy before apologizing and inquiring about the price. To his surprise, the cost is $22.42, which he finds to be quite high. In response, Scott goes inside to retrieve his wallet. Feeling sympathetic towards the pizza boy due to the freezing weather outside, Scott invites him in and asks him to close the door. Curiosity piqued, he asked the pizza boy, whose name is Gerard, for his own name. As Scott scans the room, he notices a woman positioned seductively in the corner of the bedroom, her eyes fixed on Gerard. Uncomfortable with the situation, Gerard tries to avoid making eye contact with her. However, when he briefly turns away, he is taken aback to find her disrobing before his eyes. Amidst the surprising spectacle, Scott finally locates his wallet. To Scott's dismay, he discovers that he only has 22 cents in his wallet. He apologizes to Gerard for the delay, explaining that he needs to leave and get cash. Gerard suggests using a credit card as an alternative, but Scott declines the offer, insisting on obtaining cash instead. Right after Scott leaves the room, his wife Jennifer approaches him and asks for his assistance. Upon his affirmative response, she summons him and inquires about his opinion on her dress. Scott, enticed by her seductive demeanor, admits that he likes it. Intriguingly, Jennifer proceeds to inquire about her previous dress, prompting Gerard to feign ignorance. Jennifer clarifies that she is referring to the dress she had been wearing earlier and proceeds to undress right in front of him. Despite Gerard's attempts to deceive her by claiming he hadn't seen anything, she cunningly traps him by questioning whether he missed seeing her body while being surprised. At this point, Gerard blushes shyly and redirects his attention towards the door. Jennifer then informs him that she's about to try on a third dress, but this time she insists that he should not peek. Subsequently, she closes the door, and after a brief interval, she reappears wearing yet another dress. At this point, Jennifer initiates a conversation about pizza with Gerard. She politely asks if he would like to have some, to which he respectfully declines, alluding to the fact that her previous remarks were not actually about pizza, but rather about engaging in sexual activity. Curious, Gerard asks if Scott, Jennifer's husband, is aware of her particular fondness for pizza. Despite her love for it, Jennifer doesn't believe Scott shares the same hunger for it. She takes notice of the pizza that arrived with Gerard and discreetly removes it, eliminating any potential distractions. Later on, she attempts to arouse Gerard's emotions by asking if it's peculiar for a pizza delivery person to encounter strangers. Gerard responds by acknowledging that it can be strange at times. Jennifer follows up by asking if he would be willing to partake in it, to which he declines. With a touch of apprehension and feigning ignorance, Gerard places the pizza on the table as she instructed. Subsequently, she seductively motions for him to sit on the bed. Unfortunately, while Gerard is seated, Scott suddenly returns, causing him to stand up in a state of anger. Fortunately, Scott remains oblivious to the situation. He removes his coat and expresses gratitude in an odd manner. Annoyed by Scott's untimely arrival, Jennifer abruptly leaves the room. And upon Jennifer's departure, he curiously asks Gerard what he said wrong. Gerard, in a light-hearted manner, assures him that he said nothing amiss, leading to laughter between the two. Scott brings a drink for himself and another for Gerard, who politely declines. Scott then reclines on the bed with his drink, initiating a conversation. Sensing the need to collect payment, Gerard asks if he can receive the money as he has to leave for work. Scott apologizes for forgetting to give him the money and heads to the table to retrieve it. In the meantime, their conversation is momentarily interrupted by a buzzing sound. As Scott turns his back to read the message, he notices that the pizza is on the bed. His expression changes and he once again inquires about the appropriate tip amount for Gerard. Gerard responds that it is entirely up to Scott, prompting Scott to ask about the customary percentage for tipping as well as the quality of service provided. Feeling uneasy, Gerard nervously replies that he simply delivers pizzas promptly. Scott then asks about the type of pizza being delivered, to which Gerard responds that it is a meat lover's pizza. Scott persistently asks Gerard if he delivered the meat lover's pizza that was left on the table to the bed. Gerard attempts to lie, but eventually confesses that he did indeed bring it there. Scott then proceeds to mock Gerard, inquiring about the frequency of such encounters. Gerard becomes fearful of the escalating situation and makes an attempt to open the door and escape. However, Scott intervenes by stopping him and firmly shutting the door. With anger evident in his voice, Scott aggressively demands to know how many times Gerard has had sexual relations with his wife. Gerard denies any involvement, but Scott manipulates the situation, claiming that Gerard referred to his wife as desperate and unattractive. Gerard refutes this claim, stating that she is actually attractive. Gerard makes a frantic attempt to escape, but Scott forcefully subdues him, using the electric sockets on the bed to tightly bind his hands and legs. With Gerard now restrained, Scott proceeds to turn on the music, revealing a disturbed state of mind as he confesses that he has been infatuated with Gerard since their first encounter. Engaging in a disturbing display, Scott repeatedly interrogates Gerard, dancing maniacally in front of him. Overwhelmed by fear and distress, Gerard shouts out for help, hoping someone will come to his rescue. However, instead of showing compassion, Scott resorts to roll around and abuse, coercing Gerard to divulge specific information before he will consider untying him. Suddenly, Jennifer comes back from where she goes, witnessing Scott's unsettling behavior and immediately expressing her outrage. She confronts Scott, vehemently reprimanding him for his actions. In his defense, Scott arrogantly claims to have knowledge about Jennifer's past actions involving Gerard. Despite Jennifer's intervention, Gerard continues to plead for assistance, denouncing Scott as mentally unstable. In his agitated state, Scott justifies his behavior. He proposes to leave Gerard while removing his pants, but Jennifer intervenes by pushing Scott away and, in a seductive manner, questions if Gerard has revealed their secret to Scott. Once again, Gerard adamantly denies disclosing anything. Gerard maintains his stance, affirming that he has not uttered a single word. As Scott stands up, confirming that Gerard indeed did not reveal their secret, he begins to investigate the situation further. Tensions escalate, leading to a heated argument where Scott questions why Jennifer failed to appreciate their marriage. The situation intensifies, resulting in a physical altercation where they start fighting and exchanging blows. Meanwhile, Gerard continues to shout for help, desperately seeking assistance. Surprisingly, the nature of their argument undergoes a dramatic transformation, and both Scott and Jennifer find themselves overcome by sexual arousal. The hostility and aggression that characterized their initial conflict give way to a new dynamic filled with heightened passion and desire. They immerse themselves in a fervent and passionate sexual encounter, completely consumed by their mutual longing. Meanwhile, Gerard, unable to avert his gaze, becomes intensely aroused as he witnesses the unfolding scene before him. As time passes, their fervor persists, and they continue their passionate exchange, building towards a climactic culmination of their desires. Afterward, the aftermath of their actions becomes apparent. The pizza they had ordered falls onto the ground, along with the spilled drink and their discarded clothing. Then it turns out and is marked by the disarray left behind as a result of their intense and impulsive encounter. Subsequently, then it turns out to be Gerard, now dressed neatly and wearing a watch. Both Scott and Jennifer are seated on the bed, with Scott nursing a mouth injury sustained during their earlier fight. He holds a towel against his mouth as he begins to evaluate their performance. It becomes evident that Gerard is actually their boss, and Scott's purpose is to assess their work performance. Gerard proceeds to provide feedback on their performance, highlighting both their successes and areas for improvement. He offers constructive criticism, pointing out mistakes and suggesting modifications to enhance their ability to arouse their customers. It becomes clear that their interaction earlier was part of a professional evaluation rather than a personal encounter. Gerard concludes by offering comments and advice to help them enhance their performance in their respective roles. Gerard contributes to the evaluation by emphasizing the importance of considering their customers' preferences and warning them to be attentive to these preferences in their work. Afterwards, Gerard hands them their payment for the job. As he prepares to leave the room, he reminds them to be prepared for their upcoming assignments and instructs them to tidy up and clean the home. With a sense of contentment, Scott and Jennifer exchange happy glances and begin to make the bed and clean the room promptly. Unexpectedly, there is a forceful knock on the door, disrupting their cleaning efforts. Filled with urgency, they hastily finish tidying the room, with Jennifer quickly returning to the bedroom. Scott rushes to open the door, and the movie concludes with his response mirroring their initial encounter, leaving the outcome of the situation open-ended and unresolved.